The Samnite Wars were a series of conflicts between Rome and various Italian peoples during the 4th century BC. But most military historians focus almost exclusively on the first two Samnite Wars, in which the Romans defeated their opponents decisively and extended their influence throughout central Italy. However, there was still one more war to come, the Third Samnite War, which ended up being the most violent and the longest out of all three and took no less than 8 years to complete. Moreover, this conflict was also far from straightforward, since it did not feature just the Romans and the Samnites alone, but also several other Italian peoples, like the Etruscans, and even the Greek colonies of southern Italy. So let's talk about the Third Samnite War, also called the War of the Italian Confederacy, an epic struggle over the region of Campania that lasted from 343 to 341 BC. At the end of the previous century, the Samnite tribes had waged a desperate war against the expanding power of Rome and had been defeated by the Roman dictator Camillus, who died in 345 BC. His successor, the consul Lucius Furius, decided to take advantage of the situation and conquer the fertile region of Campania. In fact, the Samnites were merely the junior partners in this war, since the real opposition to Rome came from the Lucanians, the Bruti and the Etruscans, who formed a formidable alliance with the Their combined armies repeatedly defeated the Romans, capturing even the consul Gaius Julius Caesar at the Volturnus River, and when the reinforcements arrived under the command of Lucius Papirus Cursor, he too was forced to flee. These defeats caused panic in Rome, and the Romans pleaded with King Artulus III of Epirus to send his brother, the famous General Pyrrhus, to rescue them. But before we continue, a quick reminder for those who are new here. In the meantime, the Romans, eager to turn the tide of the war in their favor, made a crucial decision. They abandoned their initial plan to campaign in Samnium and Lucania, and instead chose to invade. This move proved successful as they defeated the Etruscans decisively at the Battle of the Chiara Valley River, forcing them to withdraw into their fortified cities. Rome then laid siege to these cities, capturing several of them, including where they discovered vast stores of supplies left behind by the Etruscans, enabling Rome to sustain its war efforts. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus arrived in Italy with his army, and the allies of Rome were ecstatic upon his arrival. However, he didn't live up to their expectations, winning only a single battle against the Samnites, the Battle of the Ceriswa. You may ask, well, mainly because Pyrrhus fought with an army of mercenaries, rather than with citizen soldiers. You see, the people of Epirus were quite short in stature, so much so that even the heavy infantry were considered light troops, and while the Epirote phalanx was tactically superior to the hoplite formations of the ancient Greeks, it was no match for the disciplined and heavily armed Roman legionaries. Additionally, Rome's strategic decision to supply grain to its troops from the captured Etruscan stores ensured that they never suffered from hunger or attrition due to lack of food. However, despite these setbacks, Pyrrhus continued to fight alongside the Romans until 341 BC, when he returned home after suffering serious losses. In fact, Pyrrhus would later lament the dire straits of his army, saying that if he had one more victory, he would be ruined. Still, thanks to Pyrrhus, the Romans managed to stabilize the front lines and buy time to regroup and devise a new strategy, and soon the tide of the war turned again, albeit not in Rome's favor. The Samnites managed to defeat the Roman legate Gnaeus Domitius and even laid siege to the important city of but the Romans refused to surrender and managed to repel the attack, killing the Samnite general or Occasado in the process. Enraged by their failure to capture the Samnites slaughtered the inhabitants of a nearby Roman colony, Frigile, and marched on Rome's ally, Naples, which was defended by the Roman general Quintus Publius. The Neapolitans had built a wall around the city's harbor to protect themselves from pirates, but that same wall now hindered their attempts to bring in supplies. With the city under siege, Publius Philo appealed to Rome for aid, and in response, 2 legions were dispatched under the command of Lucius Papirius Cursor. Meanwhile, the Lucanians were causing havoc across southern Italy. They had defeated the Romans in many battles and even managed to lay siege to. In response, the Tarentines called upon the help of their allies, the Spartans and the Greek colonies of southern Italy, who sent reinforcements to defend the city. In the end, the invaders were forced to retreat after inflicting heavy casualties on the Lucanian cavalry at the Battle of the Brentis River. And in the north, the Roman dictator Lucius Furius Camillus was trying to subdue the Etruscans once and for all. He had already captured several key cities, including Populonia, Roselle, and Volterra, and was now preparing to lay siege to the last remaining independent Etruscan city. But before he could do so, news arrived that the Samnites had broken through the Roman defenses and were marching on Rome. Camillus was forced to abandon his campaign in Etruria and rush to the defense of the city. As the Samnite army approached, they established a camp near the Porta Metronia, ready to lay siege to the city. But their hopes for a quick victory were dashed when the Romans, led by the consul Titus Manlius, the Samnites were completely routed, losing their baggage and standards. And while the Romans pursued them as far as their camp, they refrained from storming it, respecting the sanctity of the Samnite customs and beliefs. Instead, they gave them time to collect their belongings and then allowed them to depart. This leniency in fueling their determination to exact revenge and sack Rome. But in the meantime, Torquatus was preparing for the long siege that lay ahead. He strengthened the city's fortifications and built fortifications outside the city walls to accommodate the expected influx of refugees. To ensure the city's defense, he stationed 3 legions and 4 auxiliary cohorts near the Porta Metronia, positioned to more legions along the Via Nimentana, and placed the elite troops under the command of his son, Titus Manlius. One day, the Samnites attacked in force, aiming to breach the city gates, but they were repelled with heavy losses, which only fueled their desire for revenge. During the night, a group of 200 Samnites infiltrated the city and set fire to the outer defenses. However, they were discovered and driven away by the Roman cavalry, who also captured some of their weapons. The Romans retaliated by launching a nocturnal attack on the Samnites, but they too were beaten back. Nevertheless, the Romans were undeterred and prepared for a new assault. They divided their forces into 3 columns, each tasked with breaching one of the 3 main gates. The Samnites anticipated this move and concentrated their forces near the Porta Metronia, expecting the Romans to strike there. However, the Roman commander, Lucius Papirius, launched a surprise attack near the Porta San Sebastiano and broke through the enemy lines. With the gates breached, the Roman infantry stormed in, engaged the Samnite defenders, and quickly overwhelmed them. The Samnites were defeated and fled towards the hills, abandoning this, and thus the Third Samnite War came to an end with a decisive Roman victory. As the Samnite allies grew weaker, Rome had triumphed over all its enemies, securing peace and prosperity for itself and its allies. In the aftermath of the war, Rome emerged as the dominant power in central and southern Italy, establishing control over the regions of Campania. It also gained the allegiance of the Etruscans, who became Roman allies. The Romans generously rewarded their soldiers for their service, granting them land, money, and glory. The Roman Senate elevated the common soldier to the status of an aristocrat, ensuring that the wealth seized from conquered territories flowed directly into the hands of the citizenry. Rome's victories during the period between 343 and 327 BC transformed the city into a true Mediterranean power. marking a significant turning point in its early history. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.